August was another super strong month in Toronto real estate. Sales were up 40.3% and average prices up 20.1% compared to August 2019. You see, it is important for us to understand the trend behind these crazy numbers and how they are related to supply and demand. So I'm going to share some insights with you by using two metrics that you normally don't hear about in the news. Some people are concerned about the increasing condo inventory. So are we in a buyer's market now? Are we just more balanced? Or are we actually still in the seller's market? You will be able to answer all those questions after you go through the analysis with me. Let's go through the two metrics first. Number one, the MLS Home Price Index. What's the most common pricing metrics that you hear about? The average selling price. Why? It is the easiest to calculate and to understand. You just add all the prices together and then divide the total by the number of sales. That's the average price. It can be a little misleading sometimes. If you have a lot more high-end transactions, then it drags up the average. You want more accuracy, right? There are 48 different variables that can affect a property's price, such as number of rooms, the square footage, the age, and so on. Are you ready to do some super complicated regression calculations with alpha, gamma, and beta? Just kidding. That's what the MLS Home Price Index is for. It takes care of all that complicated stuff and calculates the index for you. So the index can tell us a much more accurate pricing trend than the average price. We are going to look at the index from 1 year ago to now for both detached houses and condos in a little bit. Number two, the sales to active listing ratio. The ratio can paint us a picture of the supply and demand. Let me explain. Sales refer to the number of transactions occurring in a single month. That's demand. Active listings refer to the number of available listings that have yet to be sold at the end of the month. So that's supply. Here's the guideline to interpret the sales to active listing ratio. If the ratio is above 20%, then it is considered a seller's market. The higher the ratio is, meaning an increasing demand, the more likely for prices to go up. If the ratio is between 15 to 20%, then it is a balanced market, and prices should stay more or less stable. If the ratio drops below 15%, then it is a buyer's market, meaning more supply than demand and more downward pressure on prices. Remember 2017? A very dramatic year in the low-rise market. Detached houses in York region experienced a big drop in prices. Guess what the sales to active listing ratio was in July 2017? 14.8%. Indeed, a buyer's market. Now that we understand how these two metrics work, let's apply them to analyze the pre- and post-lockdown market in the city of Toronto. Number one, detached houses. Let's start from August 2019. The sales to active listing ratio was around 40%. Remember that anything above 20% is a seller's market. As you know, the market was very hot early this year before the pandemic hit, and that was reflected in the ratio. It went way up to 65%. Supply was very tight. Then it went way down to 27% when we are deep in the lockdown. After the reopening, it went up to 69.6% in July and 65.6% in August, even higher than early in the year. That explains why we keep seeing record high prices these 2 months. And that's consistent with the MLS Home Price Index, which is showing an upward trend since last year. In terms of the average number of days it took to sell a house, it dropped from around 30 days to only 16 days. That's another piece of data pointing to a very competitive market. Number 2, condos. The condo market is interesting. There's always been casual talk about too much supply since 2012. Yet, prices have never dropped since then. Let's see what the sales to active listing ratio is telling us. August 2019, the ratio is at 66%. February this year, 106%. March, 89%. That's serious undersupply. And that's exactly why you heard the market was extremely crazy just before the pandemic. What's the ratio in August? We were at 34%, still well above the 20% seller's market mark. So we did get more supply, but the demand is still there. We basically went from extremely crazy to not so crazy. And that explains why we are not seeing a price drop. You see, the MLS price index is pretty much flat since the pandemic. In terms of the average number of days it took to sell a unit, 17 days in February, 13 days in March, and 18 days in August. So still pretty much the same. Based on the data, the market is actually pretty healthy and not as crazy as before. It is true that we are still facing challenges in the rental market, and you may need to suffer a couple months of vacancy. Of course, different people will decide to take different paths. Some people would choose the negative route. They think that the pandemic would drag on, things would get a lot worse, and everything is going to crash. Some people would see the extremely low interest rate and less competitive market as an advantage, big enough to pay the price for a couple months of vacancy. A lot of people are investing in the pre-construction market instead, because they can put their money into tangible assets, so cash won't depreciate with money printing, and at the same time, they don't have to worry about rental at the moment. Which path would you take? I would stay away from negative people because they have a problem for every solution. If you want to stay on top of the market, make sure you subscribe to my channel and hit the bell now.